Across the Desk
with Clement Manyathela
on 702.
On our Across the Desk feature today, I want us to have a conversation about NGOs, NPOs, and how they function, because they play a critical role. It's actually interesting because just before we wrapped up the 702 open line, there were some of you that were calling about scrutiny that's required on some NGOs. But I think they do play a pivotal role, particularly in this country, often stepping in where government systems seem to be falling short. They've provided social support, advocacy, community development, whether you talk about child protection, education, human rights, economic empowerment. These are organizations that have often become the backbone of civil society. And I want us to really understand how they go about doing their work, the pressures, because it's not easy to run an NGO, I can only imagine. Especially now when you've got international funding beginning to dwindle as well, the pressure that you are facing as well. So my guest today in studio, we've got Dr. Shaheeda Omar. You've heard her before on this station, the director at Teddy Bear Clinic, joining us in studio. Dr. Omar, thank you so much for making time. Good morning.
Morning to you and morning to the listeners, and thank you for this great opportunity.
Thank you for coming through. We also have Tebogo Khaas, who's also been on this station before, who is the founder and director of Public Interest South Africa. Brother Tebogo, thank you for also making time. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me, Clement.
Thank you so much. Let's start with, just for the benefit of some of our viewers that may not know what advocacy you do and what your organizations represent. Dr. Omar, just give us a sense of the Teddy Bear Clinic and what you advocate for.
So the Teddy Bear Clinic is an organization that works with victims of child abuse, all forms of abuse, physical, sexual, purposeful neglect, child trafficking, victims that victimize other children. So we provide both medical, legal support and psychosocial support to victims of child abuse and their families. It's an integrated and holistic, comprehensive approach to service delivery. I think you asked the question of advocacy, and I think that's a very important thing, because working on a micro level where we're providing therapeutic support, assessments, and further interventions with referral pathways to other stakeholders, we also look at the violation of children's rights. Where children's rights are violated, we then act on behalf of children, giving the voiceless a voice. Children's voices are not heard, and they are often the invisible beings that are left to their own pain and trauma. So just to give you an idea that historically, over the years, when we have seen these omissions, and it's glaring omissions where children have been subjected to secondary victimization and further trauma with the pieces of legislation, we've actually stepped in. If we look at the Sexual Offences Act, sections 15 and 16, where an application was made to the highest court, the Constitutional Court, and we were successful in decriminalizing, sexual activities of children. Furthermore, even corporal punishment, and then the statute of limitations, where amended relief was provided both to children and adults. So we know that for rape, there was no statute of limitations, but for sexual violence, there was a period of 20 years, and that has been relieved. So that is the kind of work that we also engage with, ensuring to promote children's rights.
Yeah, and Brother Tebogo, at Public Interest South Africa, what do you do?
Yeah, thank you, Clement. What we do, we're founded in 2008, and what we really focus on is three key areas. First of all, areas of governance, and advancing constitutionalism, and ensuring that there's ethical citizenship. Our motto is, let's make our democracy work. So what that tells you is that whatever it takes to ensure that we live up to the promise of the Constitution, we do that. And we do that by holding power to account mainly, and also advocacy, as well as programs that we do also use to actually put to effect the kind of message that we want to espouse, And we loosely put, we operate at the intersection of governance, justice, and ethics. So all that talk to one thing. And if you look at our four main programs that we have, we've got on the one side, we've got economic inclusion, you've got governance and ethics, where you find the likes of whistleblowing, electoral integrity project, those falls under that. And then you also have under procurement, public procurement or open procurement, would have the procurement barometer, which seeks to see that there's compliances with procurement prescripts in the public sector. And then last but not least is where we talk about justice and equity, where we've got the rule of law as a key project that we have there. The rule of law, what we do is we partner, as we have with the South African Police Service, Business Against Crime, and other like-minded institute, whereupon we seek to see how can we improve policing. Because it's one thing to advocate, it's one thing to criticize from the outside, but you must be able to go in there and see what it is that is happening and how best can you be able to also lend a helping hand, small as it might be our hand is. So that's in broad terms, that is the space that we're seeking to do. We are obviously known more about our whistleblowing efforts, which programs like the Whistleblower Awards and Whistleblower Summit we started 3 years ago, our flagship projects. But we hope that electoral integrity is also going to be key, because we've seen the edifice of our democracy being knocked, especially if you look at what happened in the last election, national elections. There's a lot at stake. Who would have dreamt crafting a constitution that one day will have people appearing before courts or convicts being serving as members of parliament. In fact, funny enough, last night I was attending a lecture by former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo at Wits, where it is quite clear that if we become inactive, in other words, to let things be or go on like this, we might end up in a situation where even the JSE, for example, is filled by 12 former convicts who decide who would be the next Chief Justice, because of how it is constituted, not Chief Justice, how most of the judges would be in terms of how they get elected in the JSC. So that is a worrisome situation where we as civil society, we as ordinary citizens, ought to be active and make sure that we participate in this democracy.
Do you find that there's more scrutiny now on NGOs, on NPOs? Because I don't think anybody who's heard what you guys have said now would be weird for thinking you don't play a critical role in this constitutional democracy. I don't know where we would be without organizations like yourselves. But there's more scrutiny now in NGOs. There are questions around the credibility and integrity of NGOs, issues of who's funding them. Are they representing the interests of those who fund them, or are they genuinely caring for the interests of South Africans? How do you navigate that?
So I think you raised such an important thing, because if we look at irregularities with regard to funding and the service delivery, and as an NGO, the Teddy Bear Foundation is primarily funded by the Department of Social Development, and there are stringent criteria for compliance. So there are a lot of rules and regulations that have to be fulfilled, and it is very, very rigorous. Previously, we found that in the child protection sector, a lot of the people that worked in the sector did not undergo the rigorous screening and vetting that is now currently required. And that is, I think, an absolutely great move and initiative to ensure that people who come into contact with children need to undergo those processes. So, yes, there's a lot of brutal scrutiny because of the extent of the incidence and prevalence of abuse. And we know that children are the most marginalized population group, and children with disabilities even more so. So the victimization, to prevent that secondary victimization, there's a lot of emphasis on also transparency. So even with regard to the funding that has been received, the audits, where funders are also very thorough in their site visits, in their request for reports, to ensure that the services that are being delivered and the services that they are funding are actually what we are reporting to. So 2 and 2 has to equal to 4. And I think that is, that's a positive move. I think furthermore, it requires a lot of effort and sound financial governance with regard to reporting and maintaining the actual documentation for any kind of inspection.
Are you allowed to receive private funding as well on top of the funding you get from social development.
Yes, so we need to, social development basically funds only the posts, not the operational
I
costs.
see.
So any
Okay.
overhead and admin costs, the organization has to then ensure that they have to augment that. So yes, of course, we reach out to private donors, to corporate funders, to any opportunity, high net worth individuals, but also generating income through events.
Okay, and you don't feel awkward sometimes when you have to take on government? Because now they're also funding some posts.
Well,
and
you
they may
raise
feel
something very
entitled.
critical, and I think it's not about taking government on. I think it's about creating that awareness and holding people accountable. As we are held accountable, and we need to be accountable, so do our counterparts, our stakeholders, our funders. So it's not actually taking them on, but making and ensuring that they do what they've committed themselves to fulfill.
Yes, and what the Constitution requires of them.
Indeed.
Because in the past, back in the day at GCIS, certain advertisements were pulled from certain newspapers because they were reporting, and exposing the rot in government. So sometimes our government can be weird like that. And for you, Tebogo, how do you navigate the issue of funding and scrutiny and the questions around the integrity of NGOs?
Gee, Clement, I wish we had the problem similar to what Dr. Omar and many of our brethren and other sister organizations out there have, because we're not funded. For the past 17 years, we've never received a single donation. The only funding that actually does filter through is when we have an event such as the Whistleblower Summit and Awards, where you'd have organizations contributing with through sponsorship certain amounts. Even that, in large part, it doesn't even cover most of the rolling out the whole event. And we wish we could afford so many other things. But we are happy because we are not beholden to somebody knocking on our door and saying, this is how you must do, this is the agenda that you must push. But we would appreciate funding, because funding makes it easier for us to actually make sure that we can carry on our mandate to serve and be much more effective in terms of reaching out and being able to deliver on this. Yes, certain projects such as the Electoral Integrity Project, it's something new still in the formative stages. We expect that it will be funded, but that is something that we hope over time will make it independent outside of public interest, because then we will envisage that it will be a multi-stakeholder type of initiative. But in terms of funding itself, we actually operate more as a body of full-time volunteers, only 2 full-time employees. And you ask yourself, how are you able to pull up so many things without funding? I honestly don't know, because every time I wake up, I say, did we really get that event done or that initiative done? I'll give you an example, such as recently we had the Whistleblowers Awards. Many people don't realize how much things fell through the cracks, only because we don't have the capacity to be able to do certain things, effectively or in a manner that would do justice to the kind of recognition that we would like to.
You would think that the organization that would back a campaign or a program like that, given the important work of whistleblowers, what more than appreciate the people who have sacrificed so much to expose the rot and say, we see you and we're grateful? Because what that does is encourage a Tabo or a Clement somewhere who's seeing the rot but who's scared and sees that actually there's a repositioning that's happening around our approach to whistleblowers.
In fact, that's a very pertinent question, Clement. I remember for example, you'd think that corporates would encourage ethical citizenship, would encourage whistleblowing. But in South Africa, as it probably is the case elsewhere around the world, you find that those who speak out tend to also become a burden to corporates themselves, who should be sponsoring initiatives such as this, because they are more concerned about their reputation. They are more concerned, they don't want to be associated with somebody who may have blown their whistle, in large part because in terms of their prospective clients or existing clients, it might be a problem in terms of business development, because they might say, hey, you hire that person that left National Treasury or that left GCIS that you used, and therefore you find most whistleblowers experiencing hardship, retaliation, and business itself. They've got lots of ethics officers. You think they've got the very best, some of the best looking whistleblower policies and guidelines. But you ask yourself, when the tire hits the road, the tire hits the road, very little actually you get to see by way of support. But we are not being very negative to business, because we are grateful to those who find that they can associate with. There are law firms that seek to see how can we help. There are SOEs, for example, say how can we help? What is it that little we can be able to do to make this work? But yes, definitely there's a lot that business need to be doing. But also because how we speak out sometimes, maybe it might not necessarily make some businesses comfortable. Because if you look from an integrity and ethics point of view, businesses fail quite a lot. In fact, look at yourself. They call it shrinkflation, but actually it's fraud. Because you go and buy a packet of chips, it's all mainly hot air inside. Oh, well, it's cold by the time you drink, you have it. But large part of it is very little chips. And then consumers pay, the price increases. Yeah. I've gone to Twitter one day to say, look at what I bought at one retailer. Yeah. It was a very nice looking sandwich, but there was half the meat. The rest of the bun was filled with nothing. So integrity is what you do when people are not looking. When you pack that sandwich, or when you instruct somebody to prepare that sandwich, make sure that you do it in such a manner that you'll be happy when customers consume it.
26 minutes after 10 o'clock. Do you work in the NGO, NPO sector? What do you enjoy about it? What are the challenges for you guys? I'd like you to share your experiences with us. I'm hosting Dr. Shaheeda Omar, who's the director of Teddy Bear Clinic, and Tebogo Khaas, who's the founder and director of Public Interest South Africa.
Across the desk
with Clement Manyathela
on 702.
28 minutes after 10 o'clock, we are hosting NGOs or NPOs, if you want to call them that, on our Across the Desk feature this morning. And I know there's some of you who work in NGOs and NPOs. I want you to share your experiences with us. And if you've got questions for my guests as well, please, you're welcome to call us on 011-883-0702. There are WhatsApps coming through as well on 072-702-1702. I'm going to ask that we put on our headphones as we go to the WhatsApp voice notes.
Sure, Clement. I had a friend of mine who wanted us to start an NGO because of the possibility of funding from America and how much money we're going to make. I obviously wasn't for the idea because I don't think an NGO is supposed to be a money-making scheme. However, I assume we need to survive. So can you please ask your gentleman there in the NGO business, how do you survive if it's a non-profit organization? So do you just do it, or do you get some of the donations and use them to buy food and electricity for home?
Hi, Clement and the team. My question to your guests is, since they can be funded by private donors, have you faced a challenge where some of your donors try to influence you to move away from an advocacy group to more a critic group or a pressure group? Thanks, David.
All right. Thank you so much, David. Two questions that I'll get my guests to respond to after the latest in Eyewitness News headlines.
Across the desk
with Clement Manyathela
on 702.
10:32 on our Across the Desk feature this morning. We're having a conversation about NGOs or NPOs, and I'm asking you if you are in the sector. I'd like to share with us what really interests you for being part of the NGO sector. What are some of the challenges for you? Do you sometimes face pressure from the donors? How do you navigate the questions around integrity, especially lately, that is being placed, and the pressure on NGOs? But we've got two questions that came through before the headlines. One was about how you survive, particularly directed at you, Tebogo, and then there's also another question around any pressure from the donors sometimes. Can we start with you?
Yeah, how do I survive? That's a very pertinent question. Can I take this off? My political upbringing, nascent days in the 80s as a university student, and as Azanian student movement activist, we used to survive with very little. One of those organizations, you don't understand, the Pan-Africanist and the Black Consciousness movement did not enjoy the kind of support that the others did. And that instilled in some of us that sense, that value of saying you can do more with little. You can still do more with little. You don't have abundance. And if anything, COVID showed us that you can actually do more with little. when we had little to earn, little, especially those who are not on salaries, and you are able to say, what is it that can be able to stretch with the little I have? How do I survive? I do run a small consultancy, a strategic advisory agency. And the little that comes out of that, unfortunately, as most of it finds its way into the passion that drives me to run public interest. And I'm not a popular father, I think, with my kids. Well, they're no longer kids, they're adults, all of them. But the point being that you're being able to learn to share the little that you might have. And by any stretch of imagination, it's not that we don't reach out. We've got billionaires, friends that we know. You reach out, and most of the time what we realize is that people with deep pockets often to have the shortest hands, as the saying goes. And we find that people don't understand that a narrative that they align with. You get SMSs, people say, hey, we like what you said, we like what you do. But I said, can you chip in? Just to make it lighter for us to be able to, to maintain this initiative. But you find that you struggle insofar as people being in. And I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush, because there are individuals who are really committed to philanthropy, who are able to assist and chip in when the need arises.
Dr. Omar, obviously you work a lot with the children. Is there really any pressure at all that you sometimes face from the donors, people who donate?
Well, I think, of course, the donors all have specific goals, objectives, and they want, they have their CSI departments where they want us to focus on specific interventions or programs. And that does influence what we deliver, because, if a funder says jump, you say how high, because they are the ones that are funding the programs and making it possible to happen on the ground. However, I think earlier my colleague alluded to the fact of speaking out, speaking up, and it's how you speak out. We have rights and we have responsibilities. And certainly our focus is on promoting the best interests of the child, the rights of children, and the responsibilities to ensure that that needed service or intervention that is desperately requested on the ground is what we need to provide. So we negotiate leverage with funders as well. Yes, there is a level of agreement or negotiation, but at the end of the day, it's doing the right thing, what is best for the child. And I cannot say that funders do not influence the service provider. They do have a certain level of influence.
What's your interest with children? And I'll ask Tebogo the same question around just the work that the NGO is doing. Because you could have gotten into a different kind of an NGO that advocates for different interests. What is it with children? What piqued your interest and made you want to work in a sector like that?
So the bottom line is that children, as I said earlier, their wounds are so deep, they're so invisible, and they're not in a position to articulate what they are feeling. But the positive side of it is, having worked with children for more than 35 years, we've seen that children who come in broken and are totally in a state of helplessness, hopelessness, and when they receive that kind of support, containment, hope, they leave with some sense of resilience. And something that always sticks to my mind, which you've probably heard me say before, where children have actually said, growing up through the therapeutic journey, where they've said that, the abuse does not define me, the abuse does not punctuate who I am. And that is something that motivates one, that there is hope for every child, provided they are given that support, containment, opportunity to turn that crisis into an opportunity. We've seen many children turn their lives around despite the devastating circumstances, and we've seen them growing into academic careers, pathways, holding responsible positions of employment, etc. So that is something that drives us, because in the NGO sector, there isn't money. You are absolutely correct. I could be a consultant. I could be working for myself. Unfortunately, that's not what fills the hole in the heart.
Yeah. What fills the hole in the heart for you? Why are you interested in this?
What fills the hole in my heart?
Playing golf and just consult.
Poor golf, let's add. Save for the hole in one that I had many months ago, but that's about the only thing I can claim to. What drives me perhaps my formative years informed me or shaped me into my being. And when I needed help or adults around me were not as responsive as I was hoping for, it sort of instilled in me a sense of the kind of person that I perhaps would like to be when I'm grown. And that is why I tend to gravitate more towards those who are in need, or towards those who are experiencing trauma or experiencing retaliation or whatever hardship of sorts. But you ask yourself then, why is it that you still continue to do it? If it's, as you rightly put, I could be doing, I'm an IT person, but I don't know anything about IT these days because that was 40 years ago and things have changed. But you ask yourself, when you look at whistleblowers, take whistleblowers as an example, you look at the kind of contribution that they've made to society and how they face retaliation, the kind of hardships that some of them lose their livelihood, some of them get ostracized from society or even from corporate themselves and even government. And you ask yourself, if I can just be there, just to say, I'm here to listen, is there anything that I can, given my constraints, be able to assist? And you see somebody, the comfort that it brings to somebody else, that for me drives me to actually, do more if I can, insofar as what I'm able to do. But also, I think I would like to also touch to one of the points that Dr. Omar made earlier around, funders putting pressure on NGOs. It is a very valid issue. And in fact, us as NGOs also hold ourselves to the highest level of ethical rigor than as we expect, or more than we expect of others, whether it's government or private sector. I'm saying this because just for last year, and I'm not going to be mentioning names, just ahead of our whistleblower awards, when the nominations had closed, one of the prominent NGOs in the space of whistleblowing, the CEO or one of the executive director, writes to us, can you please nominate this person and award them? I said, but to start with, don't you know that the closing days for nominations have long gone past? You want me to do something that isn't ethical? Because why? This company, this man or this person, you want to reward them because their company somehow contributes to your cause, and that is not ethical. So if we want to hold government to certain accountability standards, we also have to live up to those standards, or even more. So you have to make choices. Sometimes the choices are very difficult to make because you end up ostracizing even the same civil society that you also wish to partner with. But you have to stand up for the truth. If I'm going to act like that against government or other entities, I must just as well do it with those that I love, which is the civil society. So we also have that conversation to have with it. Even some of us within this NGO space, we actually act against each other, either as gatekeepers or trying to make sure that we wish others to fall and not succeed. Competing, unhealthy competition. And some of us occupy positions, even in state-funded institutions, that actually can determine who gets to participate in and out of these things. I mean, you ask yourself about G20. You ask yourself how many NGOs out there that could have something to do with whistleblowing are actually playing a role in the anti-corruption working group of the G20. I'm listening. I'm waiting.
And absolutely. 17 minutes now before 11 o'clock. Adele in Parkview, I'll start with your call after the break. We're also going to take your WhatsApps on 072 702 and 702.
Across the desk
with Clement Manyathela
on 702.
15 minutes before 11 o'clock. Adele, you're calling us from Parkview. Good morning.
Hi, Clement. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks. I'm told you are a board member of an NGO.
Yeah, I'm a director on the board of the NPO Surgeons for Little Lives, which is at Baragwanath Hospital. We've been going for 10 years, and one of the things I think that we have faced, or part of what's partly made us successful, is the fact that we're incredibly transparent about fees and admin fees, etc., versus the amount of money that actually goes to the kids. Our thinking is that it's a very unregulated territory in our country. So there's no real transparency around whether board members take fees, and we all volunteer, so none of us take fees. And I think that it becomes, with donor fatigue, it becomes even more important for people to understand that they need to know where exactly the money is going. And and evidence of it to ensure that the majority of the funds are going to the cause. And I mean, I think in our country, there's some NGOs and NPOs that just get away with like 45%, of the money brought in goes to running it and salaries, etc. And it's just way too high. So I think our transparency has been part of our success, where our fees have been extremely low, and therefore our donors know that the majority of the fees are going directly to the kids.
Oh man, what's the name of that NGO again, Adele?
Surgeons for Little Lives.
Oh man, thank you so much for the work you do, Adele. I really think, you guys really give us hope. You do. I was having a conversation the other day about what I'm calling the spirit of sacrifice. And I was saying, what happened to that spirit that sort of guided the people who fought for democracy, because they sacrificed so much. Like they were willing to sacrifice because they had a bigger goal. And sometimes you feel like we don't have that anymore. But here are people who are actually doing so much work when they don't have to, but they're sacrificing, they are spending their own monies, they are volunteering, they are taking jobs, and they could be making big bucks even in the private sector. And here they are because they care about the interests of the people they represent and advocate for. Adele, thanks for the work you do. Thanks for calling us from Parktown and sharing your experience with us. Here are some WhatsApp voice notes that have come.
Morning, Clement. This is such an important conversation. I also work for an NGO, and I help raise funds. And the problem we always encounter, people are more than willing to fund the project itself and to help people, but they are not willing to pay for operations. And sometimes the budget for the operations is a lot more than the budget of actually doing the project, because you have to pay multiple people to run a specific project. I just want to know how your guests feel about this.
Morning, Clement and your guests. I greatly appreciate the work done by NPOs. I mean, I'm working today as a health promoter, but started working from as early as 1999 for different NPOs. And it is my wish that taking into consideration our youth unemployment rate in our country, that if young people could learn to do voluntary work for different NPOs, that would go a long way in giving them much needed experience and also improving their CVs as well. Thank you. Great show.
Clement and your guests there. My first job was with Development Action Group, which is an NGO in the housing space. It gave me a solid understanding of what being an activist in that space means. And it really gave me a good foundation.
Thank you so much for your WhatsApp voice note. There was a question there, Dr. Omar, about when you raise funds, sometimes the funders don't want to pay for operations, but for the specific program. How do you navigate something like that? Is that something you also experience?
Indeed, I think that's been historically a long-standing battle where we've had to augment, as I said in the beginning of the interview, that we have a dedicated fundraising department, our donor liaison person who actually, requests in-kind donations, funds, and we write proposals to respective corporates, etc., looking out for opportunities because the operational costs are high. We need the barefoot soldiers on the ground to go out into the hotspot areas, the disadvantaged communities where they do not have any access to resources. And this, of course, means that a lot of time, human resources, and other resources are actually spent on the ground. So this is something that we continue fighting for, and we continue the struggle. I think what we need to also appreciate is that as an NPO, non-for-profit organization, we do not charge for our services. So everything that is provided, coming in not only with the self-actualization, the therapeutic interventions, but even post-COVID, where we've looked at food security and providing those kind of supportive measures to carry families through their, basic foods, like basic food and shelter challenges. We've had to reach out to funders and organize fundraising events. Looking at stationery, we take it for granted. End of the year, parents now need to provide that for children, but it's stationery, school bags, all of that comes with an investment. So those are the things that we continue fighting for, and we do not give up, but we reach out to high net worth individuals, to corporates, to financial institutions, and we have been, I would say, considerably successful in getting that kind of response where children are getting, some kind of support.
8 minutes before 11.
Across the desk
with Clement Manyathela
on 702.
7 minutes before 11 o'clock. Let's go to some more WhatsApp voice notes on 072 702 1702.
Hi, Clement. This is Itumele Hlapane from Sebokeng. A quick question to your guest there. Have they thought of the possibilities of transitioning into social entrepreneurship? And this question is just purely based on the idea that funding and donations are becoming a problem right now in South Africa. Like you rightfully put it, with what's happening around the world. Would they be, or have they considered transitioning into social entrepreneurship just for the purpose of sustainability? And my understanding of non-profit organizations is that building a beautiful legacy for your community and the country, but unfortunately, your family cannot enjoy the legacy and the benefits of that financially for over the years. I recently facilitated a workshop on social entrepreneurship for over 80 non-profit organizations last week in Gauteng. Thank you. I'm looking forward to hear from them and to get their opinion.
Okay, but what would be different then? So you're using what, business principles for, I suppose, your social, to create solutions to whatever issues you're still advocating for. You're still going to face the same issues at some point.
And the minute you also include the word entrepreneurship, there's an association with commercial, lest it be mistaken, NPOs are not necessarily meant to be loss-making entities. They have to be sustainable themselves. So even donors must understand that if you want me to go and execute that initiative, I have to drive my car. I have to answer my phone. I have to do certain things that may not necessarily go directly, as an expense item to the project itself. So there must have to be consideration. But the issue of transparency is very important, because NGOs or NPOs also have to be transparent with their funders. And the more you are able to leave to the disbursements towards the project itself, the better it is that NGOs, the funders should also be happy.
Yeah. Be on the WhatsApp line, says Clement, such an important topic. NPOs play a critical role in our communities, yet government and politicians remain detached from real issues. It is unfortunate that some NPO owners use the space for self-enrichment. We need stricter controls, especially since even those tasked with oversight are often part of the problem. I got a message from a woman who says, would you guys advise for children to do some work in NGOs before they get to varsity or while they're still in school? Could that assist?
Thank you. I think that's an excellent question that the person has raised, because at the Teddy Bear Foundation, we certainly encourage children and youth to get involved. So they're already learning about rights, responsibilities, but also, I think more importantly, empathy, understanding what it feels like to be in a challenging situation, to be a victim, but also learning solutions. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to mobilize children to become more solution focused and then the rights-based approach where they are more informed in making choices moving forward. So we encourage children, of course, depending on the ages, age-appropriate activities. But I want to just respond quickly to the former call that was made around training and upskilling youth, learnerships, people coming in as volunteers. That is a platform we've actually encouraged and motivated a lot of young people to come on board, where they've become not only entrepreneurs, but also found themselves in positions where they are employable and have pursued further studies.
Yeah. Do you think it helps? Because I mean, we sort of like, we were raised in a generation where we're thinking about, oh, I want to finish varsity because I want to just buy my dream house, my dream car. But the sense of service is lacking.
Absolutely. We need to encourage or inculcate in the minds of the youth this civic duty, because so far it has always been about my rights. I've got the right to smoke anywhere, don't tell me. I've got the right to misbehave in a school uniform, don't tell me anything. And even us as parents have abdicated our role insofar as ensuring that the youth or the young ones actually get to grow in an environment that teaches them empathy, that imparts the kind of values that most of us have grown up with. But I am somehow encouraged, if you look at institutions such as the University of Johannesburg, and I think UNISA and maybe a few others, they've already made ethics as a core requirement for any of the offerings that they have. So but it should start early. We should grab them while they're still young. You know, at primary school, at high school, make sure that we introduce the issue of integrity, ethics. But we as parents have got a responsibility. When you see your child coming back from school with a cell phone or a jersey that don't belong to them, you should be able to tell them that's not yours. Take it back to where it belongs. But unfortunately, we keep a blind eye. That's how we end up with slay queens, because they have to keep up with the Joneses, because then, you know, whatever it takes to have that most beautiful car or house.
Yeah, Tebogo Khaas, Dr. Shaheeda Omar, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've really inspired us. You've particularly inspired me. Thank you for the sacrifices you make and for the advocacy work that you make. I don't know where we would be without organizations like yours. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having us, Clement.
It's a minute before 11.